26 people or so, split between both Las Vegas as well as DC. Basically what we do is we do like HR employee experience software. So our customers are brands like JP Morgan Chase, Visa, Accenture, Chevron, FedEx, Sephora. So pretty much very large Fortune 500 companies across the globe. And they purchase our software for many different reasons. There's like survey tools we have, communication tools, mentoring tools, and a bunch of other things that we've built. Now, basically, we started the company 5 years ago, and from the headline of today, I thought a good headline would just kind of be like get down to the money part. So basically, we started the company 5 years ago. We bootstrapped it, so we started it with about like $10,000 between me and my co-founder, and we've taken it up now to in excess of about $50 million. So what I wanted to do today is just kind of map out how I've done that, how that actually like kind of worked over the course of 5 years. I know some folks here might be like having like the VC bend where it's like, oh, I want to go raise money. My kind of spiel here is going to be don't do that, because you'll see once I start writing some numbers on the board, the money makes a lot more sense when you don't go that route. It's very easy to think like, oh, let me go and raise 100 grand, let me go raise $1 million, $2 million bucks. But oftentimes that like doesn't work out for everyone, and I'll explain today how to do that. How much time do I have here? Do I have like? I can go for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. That's fine with everyone.
Session ends at 1. This program ends at 2. It's up to the people. If you guys feel like we are invading your time, feel free to head on out. But this will be live streamed for as long as Maneet is here.
Cool.
So you guys can always go and watch our YouTube shorts and YouTube live stream recap.
Cool.
Yes, Chris? It'll be live streamed. So yeah.
We'll go for like 30 minutes, or
I can go for 15. I can go to 30. You know, whatever makes sense for everyone, right?
okay.
Yeah.
So
So
one of this sounds interesting.
Yeah, we want to do that right.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I can go for as long as y'all want.
Is there a place you can take this home?
If you walk out to the right, there's gonna be rooms, like small, like conference.
Yeah.
Come,
Cool.
just come to me.
All right. Everyone ready to rock and roll? All right. Perfect. So again, we started the company in 2020. Prior to that, I was working at a company called BCG. It's called the Boston Consulting Group. And then my co-founder was a CTO of kind of like a private equity-backed telecom company, right? So that's number one. Don't do this shit by yourself. Don't ever try to do this stuff by yourself. Like, you're gonna end up getting nowhere, right? Some people have pulled it off, but like I would say it's probably like not that easy to do. So definitely like find someone, right? And also find someone that has like complementary skill sets to you. Don't find someone who just does the same stuff that you do, right? So like my skill sets were like product design, sales, getting in front of the customers, being able to pitch the thing, right? Versus my co-founder's skill sets were, you know, hard engineering, right? So being able to actually build like a scalable SaaS software, knowing how the infrastructure has to work. Because when you're selling to enterprises, you can't just have like some like no-code, low-code solution. They'll tear that thing apart as soon as you go through the procurement processes, right? So you need to be able to demonstrate that, hey, this is like a robust, scalable software, which my co-founder was able to demonstrate and make sure that we do. Plus, my co-founder was also good with like back-end business things, like making sure our taxes are paid, making sure the finances are all right, everything from like revenue recognition. He had a good foundation of that. So we had very complementary skill sets. He ran kind of the back office and all the back-end engineering, and I did all the front-end engineering and all the front-end sales, customer success, and all that stuff. So that's number one, is find a co-founder, and that's not easy to do. If you ever try to do it, you can like end up in like really hard places. But I would say the way I found this guy was I just pinged him on LinkedIn, right? I just like literally found him on LinkedIn and was like, hey, I kind of knew of him, right? But I just gave him the pitch and was like, hey, this is what I'm looking to do, and met at a Starbucks and then started to work together, right? So always go into these things, kind of with a team, right? The next thing that we did, and this is really important from a legal perspective, is we started the company as an S corp. Is everyone here familiar with like the legal entity structures, like S corp, C corp, LLC? Anyone have a familiarity with that? So if you ever raise money from a VC, they're going to make sure you do a C corp, right? And they're going to make sure it's a Delaware-based C corp. That's just how they do it, because they want to deal with Delaware courts and Delaware states, and they're going to force you to do a C corp. There's some advantages to that, and it's more so advantageous to them when they're putting money in your company. They're going to force you to do a C corp. If you're going to bootstrap it, do an S corp. And I'll tell you why. When you do an S corp, it's a flow-through entity, meaning when the company starts generating revenue, let's say you generate $10,000 revenue and there's $5,000 of profit, that $5,000 of profit doesn't get taxed at the company level. That $5,000 flows to you as co-founders. So if you have two co-founders, that $5,000 goes directly to you and your co-founder, $2,500 each, right? That's how the S corps flow. But what's really important about that is in 2017, when Trump did the tax cuts, there's something called QBI, qualified business income, right? Qualified business income, and I'll just write this here, just keep this in mind, QBI. What that is a 20% deduction on the taxes. So when you make that $2,500 as a personal income, as a distribution that year, you can deduct 20% of that, right? So what is 2,500 or 20%? It's like $500 or something like that, right? So $500 is tax free, you get to keep that. Now at $2,500, that's not that much. When you start making $25,000, $250,000, that's a lot of money you're saving, right? So that's the next thing. If you are going to start a company, you are going to bootstrap it, you don't have to take my recommendation, but my recommendation would be start an S corp and have it all flow through. That's a much better way to do it, right? All right, and then the next thing that we did was build product and find first customer. So our first customer happened to be Under Armour, right? And the way we got that was I literally just pinged them on LinkedIn, right? Now, I don't really know how active LinkedIn is anymore. I don't personally use LinkedIn all that much. This was back in 2020. People were heavy on LinkedIn, but there's other channels that you can do to find a customer. I mean, just cold email them, right? A good tool is Apollo. Apollo's not cheap. It might run you $1,000 or so for the year for one license, but it can find every email address in pretty much in any one of these companies, right? This is more if you're doing B2B companies, right? B2C, it's a little easier to get your first customer, right? You just have to find one dude that's willing to pay you, right? But if you're doing B2B and you're trying to get a big logo, again, it's not easy to get these brands, right? Like you have to go through the procurement processes, security processes, you know, all these like various checks. But the first key thing is like get the first customer. Our first customer was $5,000 a year, right? Which like it's still pretty cool, right? Back then I was like, shit, hell yeah, we got a first customer, right? It's still meaningful. You're not able to live off it, but we're still able to get that first customer. Just to put it in perspective, like 5 years later, now we have customers that pay us about $1 million a year, right? And we've been able, and I'll tell you like how we kind of grew that value proposition over the years. So that's number one. It's like get the first customer, right? Whatever you got to do, just get the first customer. What I would also say is in year one, me and my business partner, we used a 100K rule. And what the 100K rule is like we didn't quit our full-time jobs until we met this metric. And the 100K rule was like, hey, have 100K in the bank and make sure you're doing 100K in revenue, right? Because when you quit your job and you do these things, a lot of shit's at risk, right? Healthcare is at risk. All this stuff is like, if you got kids, it's even crazier, right? But the rule that we used when we both said, hey, let's just quit our jobs and do this, and he had a family at the time. I had just got married, so I didn't have family. But 100K in the bank and 100K personally and 100K in revenue, you're pretty safe, right? Like you're not gonna like just end up on the street. You're not gonna have like a crazy incident that happens to you, right? Like you're pretty insulated and you can go for a period of time. Because I went about a year and a half with no salary, right? So did he. You have to be able to figure that out from a personal finance perspective and so forth. Now again, that's a personal thing. Maybe you can do it on 20K, maybe you can do it on 30K, right? For us, he had kids. I just got married, right? My wife was not making that much money at the time. She had medical school loans, so that's the metric we use. And that's a really good way to like jump into this kind of like world where it's like, shit, I got, because once you go into this, you got nothing, right? You got no health insurance, you got no 401K, you got none of these benefits that you got used to at your corporate job, right? So that's the next rule. So that was year one, and then year one, we landed a big customer at the end of it, which was Chevron, CVX. And that was like our big deal, which was like 100K a year, right? So that's where we were like, all right, this thing actually has legs, it has product market fit. There's a large company willing to write a 6-figure check a year to be able to do this, right? And that's where we were like, all right, now let's actually like go and like really quit the jobs, go full time into this thing, and like really take this on, right? Because we had enough like assurance in the business that this thing has product market fit, and if Chevron's willing to pay it, other people are probably willing to pay it. Yeah, go ahead. What's your name?
Yeah, Chris.
Chris. Nice to meet you, Chris.
I'm also bootstrapping, so
My man.
respect the hustle. So, how did you navigate as a small team, really big deals with tons of stakeholders?
Oh, dude, because we only had 2 people. I'll tell you what, like at first the company was registered out of my mom's townhouse, and even Chevron, when they looked, you have to put your address on these things, right? They were like, hey, what is this? And I was just like, yeah, what do you want me to tell you? It's my mom's address, right? Like that's what it is. There's like it's a townhouse, right? But what I would say is like, you know, at the end of the day, these enterprises are just trying to solve a problem, right? The only reason they're talking to you is because they have some business problem. And there's an acronym that a lot of people use when you're trying to build your business, which is HTML, not the hypertext markup language, but HTML means if you're building a business, at very least you should try to save someone's headache, right? Better than that is saving someone time, right? Better than that is saving someone money, and the epitome of all businesses is if you can save lives. If you can save lives, I mean, this is why do you think biopharma right? Like, why do you think McKesson is like a massive company, right? Because they literally create devices that can save lives, right? But at the very basis of it, if you can save someone headaches, they'll talk to you, right? But if you can save them time or save them money, especially in B2B SaaS, then you'll probably have like, a pretty good shot at getting a deal with them. But yeah, navigating it, it's like first, you gotta get the first demo, right? The first demo, again, we just do cold email. We still do cold email as of this day. We don't spend any money on marketing. We just use Apollo and we blast off about 3,000 to 4,000 emails a day. And that gets us leads, right? That gets, out of 3,000 to 4,000, maybe we'll get 2 people that are like, hey, this is cool, let's have a demo, right? But when you do 4,000 emails a day, every single day for 5 years, those numbers tick up, right? And then sooner or later, you're getting 10 demos a month, 20 demos a month, things like that. But yeah, when you're going through like the B2B procurement cycle, initial demo, you gotta get past that. Then our next stage is like conducting additional demos, because they're not gonna buy the thing off of one demo, right? We just signed a deal with Capital One, it was 40 demos, right? So you have to be able to get through that, right? And then after that, once they say, all right, this is cool, then you gotta go through security gates, right? So you have to make sure that you have a SOC 2 audit done. You have to make sure that you can demonstrate that your product can go through pen tests, can go through geo redundancy tests and all these things. You can't bullshit your way through that, because the guys on the other side will find it pretty smart, right? They'll figure it out very quickly that like you're bullshitting it. So you have to be able to do that. If you can't do that, in my humble opinion, you probably just like shouldn't be the game. Because like they'll figure it out, right? They'll figure it out, they'll call you out, and then you're gonna lose your brand, right? So make sure you can get through the security audits and the accessibility audits and all that. Once you can get through that, and you can demonstrate that, hey, I have a knowledge of this and I know what I'm doing here, then at that point, you're just doing contract negotiation, right? And at contract negotiation, there's only 2 real things that you ever want to really worry about. 3 things, actually, that you want to worry about with these companies, right? Because foremost, they're going to make you sign their paper. Even though you might have your own subscription agreement, your own terms of service, they're going to tell you to take a walk with that, and they're going to say, you're going to sign our master subscription agreement, because it's more aligned to their own risk tolerance. They're not going to ever give you the time of day to sign your own contract. They're going to say, take a walk. Here's our paper, right? And those are typically 40, 50, 100-page contracts. Now, there's only 3 things that you have to worry about in there. Insurance, right? So you have to make sure you meet their insurance requirements, right? Like, techie, insurance, workers' comp, all that. You have to make sure you can meet that, right? Because they're going to ask you for the certificates of it. But the other 2 that are more important is limitation of liabilities and indemnification, right? Limitation of liability means when you fuck up, how much can they sue you for, right? And typically, their contract is always going to say unlimited limitation of liabilities, meaning they could take your entire company if you lose their data, if you fuck something up, right? So that's the core thing you always negotiate. And the easiest way to negotiate that is say, hey, we will max that out at 2x revenue, right? So if that company's paying your business 100 grand, the max they can sue you for is 200 grand. Most of the time, the companies will agree to that, right? They'll be fine with that, right? And then indemnification is like, who's indemnifying who, right? Like, what are you liable for? What am I liable for? All these various things. A lot of that has to do with IP, and that's the only thing you need to worry about, because their contracts are going to say like, hey, if we invent something on your technology, meaning we tell you, hey, your technology, we want you to build this on top, and that's our IP that we've given you, then they have a claim to that, right? So those are the only 3 things you need to worry about from a contract perspective. Everything else is kind of bullshit in those contracts, right? They're really not going to do anything. But insurance, limitation of liabilities, and indemnification. Those are the 3 things. And then once you get through red lines, because the thing is, you also don't want to redline the contract too much, right? Because their lawyers are busy. Their lawyers got other shit going on, right? You want to make it as simple as possible. Be like, hey, these are my 3 things, and that's all I need. And then if you can get through that, then they'll sign the contract. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the process to like get one of these customers to go through your procurement process. That's at the Fortune 500 level. It's probably easier if you're going to sell to SMBs, and if you're going to sell to 100-person companies, 200-person companies. They probably don't have as rigorous of processes. But like what I've seen is like our largest customer is probably Accenture. Accenture has about 850,000 employees across the globe, right? Versus our smallest customer is probably like this little credit union called True Line Credit, right? Accenture pays us about like $750K a year. This True Line Credit company pays us like $7,500 a year, right? They both made us go through the same level of effort to sign these deals, right? So that's why from us, like another thing you have to understand in year 1 is like, what is your ICP? What is your ideal customer profile? We've learned this the hard way, where it's like, we just try to get every deal. But then we quickly realize like, hey, this customer that's paying us 10 grand a year, that 10 grand is more meaningful to them, right? They're gonna make us go through the same hoops to get this thing signed, right? And they're probably gonna like, want our time more, versus like the company that's paying us 500 grand a year, like a JP Morgan. 500 grand a year for JP Morgan's a rounding error, right? Like they don't even see that on the spend charts, right? So So for them, like I'd much rather do those deals because it's going to take the same amount of time to close it. It's a massive, bucket of revenue that you get to collect every single year, right? And if you're paying 500 grand a year, those companies are pretty invested in your technology. They're not gonna churn and things like that. So that's how we look at like ideal customer profile, and you want to figure that out very soon. Because if you start going and getting all these like random customers, like because when in year one you're gonna be very inclined to be like, oh, let me get this customer just to grow. The problem is if you get shitty customers and they churn, your metrics are fucked and your multiples fucked at that point, right? So if I could go back in year one, I would have defined my ICP a lot earlier and have much more rigor around it and turn down deals. And I'll explain why as we go through. But that's everything we did in year one, right? So we found co-founders, did our legal entity setup, built product. Now again, we built the product ourselves, right? So that's a big advantage we had. But nowadays with AI, you can pretty much build these things yourself, right? We built this back in end of 2019, 2020. So we had to do it pretty much ourselves, right? But now, and again, we spent about 10 grand to build it, right? That 10 grand was we just hired some offshore developers to help us out, build some stuff. But you probably don't even need that anymore, right? You can probably do it with 2 grand or something like that, right? The AI stuff is pretty good. But yeah, we found our first customer, followed our 100K rule, got our big deal. So Chevron was our big deal, right? And that's what, kind of allowed us to really have conviction in the business. And then again, we just followed the HTML thing and just made sure that, hey, any customer, just save them time or save them money and have a way to do that. So that was year one. We ended year one, I think if I look back on it, we ended year one probably doing 120K in revenue, right? At the end of the whole thing. So it wasn't too bad. It was still a good business. And because we bootstrapped it, again, that 120K was pretty profitable, right? On that 120K, we probably made 80K in profit, and that 80K flowed to both of us. Again, remember the S corp thing, where we each got 40 grand and we paid our 80% of the taxes on that, and we were able to pay some bills and pay some stuff back off. So that was year one. Does that make sense to everyone? Is that pretty clear? Any questions on that?
What was the first point?
The first point is find a co-founder. Yeah.
I think I missed it. What does your company do?
Yeah, so we build HR employee experience software, right? So at these large companies like an Accenture or a JP Morgan or a Visa, employee experience is a super big thing. Why? Because they want their employees to stay there, they want their employees to perform better, they want their employees to feel part of the company and things like that. So we pretty much have a pretty robust platform now. So everything from employee-led events to mentoring to surveys to communications to recognition, all these various things are suites of the software that we provide. And all these companies buy it for different use cases, right? It could be for community use cases, event management, volunteering use cases, things like that. All right. Any questions on that?
Oh, sounds good.
Cool. So that's what we did, right? All right. Then in year two, here's what we did in year two. So in year two, you want to be able to grow that business, right? And so the thing is metrics. So let me just kind of back up real quick. This year we did a deal where we were able to sell off the majority of the business at a $50 million valuation. So that's 8 figures, right? We did 8 figures, right? And we sold it to private equity. The only way you're going to do that, and by the way, we did that at a 10x multiple. Getting a 10x multiple nowadays is hard as shit, right? Because multiples in 2020, 2021, you can get a 10x just by talking to someone on the phone, right? Because the interest rates were really low. Right now, interest rates are really high, right? So trying to fetch a 10x multiple is damn near impossible, right? It is very hard. I know when you go online and you read these articles oh, this AI company raised this, raised that, don't get concerned with that. A lot of that stuff, what's more important is deal structure, right? Some of those guys got 10x multiples, but they don't own any more of their company, right? So it's kind of pointless. We still own 80% of the whole business, right? So it's a pretty good situation we're in, and we control the board, which we'll get to. But the only way you can get those 10x multiples is if you have really good metrics, right? And the only metrics that matter in this game is growth, right? So you have to be able to show that, hey, especially in the early days, you have to be 100% growth every single year. Because when you have 100 grand of revenue, right, 120 grand of revenue, it's not that hard to go to 240 grand of revenue, right? It's not that hard to go from 240 to go to 600 grand of revenue. It's easy to do that because you get momentum. Once you get to our stage where it's $5 million a year in revenue, it's not easy to fucking get another $5 million in revenue in 12 months, right? It's pretty hard to do. You still already have 20-30% growth and things like that. So growth, extremely important, right? The next one that's even more important is probably retention, right? Retention, you have to retain your customers. If you have a business that, even if you're doing $1 million a year, but you have to rebuild that millions of dollars every single year because you have so much churn, your company might be worth 1x of revenue, right? So if you're doing 500 grand, maybe you can flip it for 500 grand. But even then, someone might say, we'll buy it for 0.5x, or we'll buy it on an EBITDA multiple or something like that. So retention is huge. GDR as well as NDR, gross dollar retention, net dollar retention. Remember those two acronyms. Those are the most important things you can remember, right? And what those mean is how much of your customers are you retaining every year, and how much of your customers are you expanding, right? So I'll give you an example. Accenture as a customer for us, they started with their first contract with us was 120K. Now they pay us about 750K, right? And every year I've been able to show like, hey, we're selling them more, we're selling them more, we're selling them more. That little storyline right there, for a buyer of your business, they will pay you an extra multiple just to be able to see that, because for them as a buyer, they're like, shit, I can buy this business and I can take Accenture now from 750 grand to 1.4 million, probably over another 5 years, right? So they're projecting the value of the business. So GDR and NDR, gross dollar retention, net dollar retention, super important. Those three metrics are kind of the only things that matter, right? Except when you're doing this game. I don't know about the VC game. VC game is different. But when you're doing this game and you're trying to go and flip a business for 50, 100 million bucks, growth, GDR, NDR. That's the only things that matter, right? So you have to have like a sticky product, otherwise your customer's going to leave. And again, that's what goes back to ICP, right? If you just get a bunch of bullshit customers, these 100, 200 person companies that just kind of like buy software and turn the software off and don't really care about anything, your metrics are going to get like all fucked up, right? And then the value of your business will kind of deplete over time. All right, so year two, the only thing we did in year two, we didn't hire any more people because we wanted to stay pretty lean, was we took this 120 and we got it to 680K, right? So it was like a, like kind of like a 5X growth, right? And so what happened then in year two, and we did that just by getting more customers, right? Because once you have like an Under Armour and a Chevron, you got logos, right? So you have like customer qualifications. You can go put blogs out and say, hey, this is how Under Armour uses our platform. This is how Chevron uses our platform. So it creates momentum, right? It creates momentum. It gives you a lot of growth. And so then other companies are like, at that point we got Sephora. Sephora's like, hey, shit, if Under Armour's using this, we should probably use this, right? And so the only thing we did in year two was we tried to triple revenue, right? As soon as you triple revenue and you have some online presence, what happens is like you'll start getting into the searches of these PE funds, right? And PE is a big game, right? At the top level, there's Carlyle, there's KKR. Don't worry about those guys. There's smaller PE funds. There's the small cap PE funds, right? That are $100 million funds, $200 million funds, and those guys are actively tracking you. They have associates, entry-level people that come into those funds where their entire job is just to find businesses like yours that have went from 120K to 680K. They're not going to buy your business at that point, but you will be on their radar, right? And they'll call you, and they'll want to get metrics on your business, right? And they'll keep tabs on you. They won't buy it at 680K, right? But they will buy it at $1 million of revenue, and you can probably get a 5X multiple and things like that. But at that point is when they'll start actually figuring out who your business is. They'll call you, they'll schedule time with you, and they'll just do like research on you, right? They'll just want to know like, what are you doing? How'd you get this much growth? Things like that. So that's all we did in year two, was just double up the revenue. We didn't hire anyone. Because once we got to 680K in revenue, we had that with 400K of EBIT, right? And again, that 400K then split to us, right, in the escort model. So I made 200, my business partner made 200. So that's not bad. That's actually probably better than what I was making at my previous job, right? So I could do this for the rest of my life if I wanted to. And that's all we did. Then in year three, now this is where you need to start showing like growth of your company, not just in terms of revenue and GDR and NDR, but you have to build like a business, right? Because no one wants to buy a business where it's just two dudes and we bounce, then like what are you gonna do, right? So you have to start showing like some organizational maturity, right? You have to start building the team. Now we made a pretty wise decision. We didn't hire leaders first. The problem with hiring leaders first, like if we wanted to hire a CRO or CFO, the problem with those hires is they're super expensive, right? They're gonna come in with a lot of like, just a lot of bravado, right? They're gonna wanna dictate things and you might clash. And also because they're very expensive, they're gonna wanna have a team, so all of a sudden they need a budget, and when they come in, they're saying, hey, I'm not gonna do the work, I need 2 people underneath me and I'll manage them, right? So it's not good to like hire leaders at first, right? And you also gotta give them up equity and all that stuff, right? So what we did was we said, hey, let's just hire like the lower level folks first and let's train them up. They're cheaper, right? They'll probably stay with us longer, right? Because they're not just gonna go somewhere else. Everything from the benefits, right? If you hire a senior person, they're gonna be older, right? The health insurance you have to pay them every month is gonna be much more expensive. These are all things you gotta worry about, right? If you hire lower people, like we were hiring, I hired like a girl that was like 19 years old, just to come in, right? Her health insurance was extremely cheap, right? It was just her, she didn't have kids, she didn't have any of this stuff, right? Now, look, it's illegal to like just discriminate. you can't do that. But just have a profile of candidates you're looking for, right? You can figure this out. Just label the job intern, right? So we hired about 3 people, right? I hired 1 AE, so 1 account executive. I hired 1 CS person, and we hired a 1 technical person, right? The AE was our account executive. She lives in Vegas. Her name is Victoria, and her whole job was just like say, hey, give me the leads, and I'm going to go and move these things forward, right? I'm going to go talk to these customers, do the demos, do all that, right? And that's really important because you can only do so many demos in a day, so you need someone that can do that and carry that message and sell. The CS person is like, hey, now that we're selling more deals, we need someone to go and sit with the customer and help set up the platform, coach them, do all the training, do all that stuff. And then we just needed 1 technical person. The reason why we needed that was for redundancy, right? So when a buyer comes to the table, it can't just be me and my co-founder who know the thing technically. You need someone else there because the buyers know, if someone puts $5 million in your pocket, you might just bounce. You might be like, I don't need to do this anymore, right? I'm good. So they know that. They know these things very well. And so you have to have that team. Just doing this in year 3 took our multiple from, initially we were getting 5x multiples, it took it from a 5 to a 7, right? And that's pretty healthy. A 2x multiple, right, at year 3, we were probably finishing year 3 doing 1.2 million, right? And so a 5x multiple, you're talking about the difference between selling the company for $5 million versus selling it for $7 million, right? That's pretty substantial at the end of the day. And we did that simply just by making 3 key hires. And again, we kept them all pretty low cost, so we still kept the EBITDA really good. So on 1.2 million, we had about, so this was the rev. On 1.2 million, we had about, it was about 900K in EBITDA. And the good thing about that is once you have EBITDA over $500,000, you can also find buyers that will just buy the EBITDA. And people will buy EBITDA at about 10x, right? People will pay 10x for EBITDA because it's cash flow, right? It's free cash, right? They'll just take that. So you can also, at 900K, you're not going to flip it for 10x, but you can probably flip that for 6, 7x or so, right? So you can flip the business for $4.5 million. All right, so that's year 1, that's year 2, that's year 3. The whole goal is just to get to $1 million business, right? The reason why that number is really important is because it shows that there's some girth to the business, right? There's something there foundational, right? Because anyone can hack their way to $100,000 in revenue. Anyone can hack their way to $500,000 in revenue, right? Because you can do funny games with the revenue, right? You can recognize things in different buckets where it's not true. Because in SaaS, and I'm not sure what businesses people are trying to build here, but in SaaS, there's only 2 types of revenue. There's subscription, right? Sub, and there's professional services, PS, right? Subscription is like when you pay Netflix $8 a month, right? That's the good revenue. That's what you're going to get rated on. The professional services is like when we do a deal, we'll say, hey, Accenture, we'll charge you $25,000 just to do the setup. That's a one-time fee though. That's not recurring every year. Subscription is recurring, right? So what I was saying was a lot of people can hack their way to $100,000 in ARR, $500,000 in ARR, because they will fudge the numbers between these 2 things. They will take their services revenue and say, oh, we're going to rate that over 3 years, so it's recurring. It's not actually recurring though. They're not paying you that every year. You're just taking the money and you're doing some funny finance math with it, right? A lot of people do this stuff, right? Tons of people do this stuff. So that's another thing when you're building these businesses and you get to $1 million in revenue. If you have a clean business where your subscription revenue is actually subscription and you're rating that 1/12, because you have to rate it 1/12. Always remember that. Because when you do these deals with B2B companies, they're going to pay you the money upfront. It's not like with Netflix where they charge you monthly, right? Where they just charge your credit card monthly. These companies want it off their books. So if you do a $120,000 deal a year, right? They're going to pay you that money up front. They're going to pay you $120K up front in net 90, or net 60. Meaning if you sign the deal on January 1st, they will send you that check on March 1st, right? Because it's net 60 is they have 60 days to pay that check, right? Now, that $120K is technically not yours, right? It's going to sit in your bank account, but you have to put that in a deferred revenue bank account because you have not earned that money, right? You have to rate that money 1/12, meaning if they pay you $120K for a year, you're only earning $10K a month, right? And so this is what I was talking about when people do funny things with the numbers, right? Some people will say, hey, we made $120K this month. That's all of our revenue. So they're going to make their month of March or whenever they get that payment look really good. But that's false. That's actually illegal. it's financial engineering, right? That money is actually $10,000 a month. You have to earn that money, right? Because again, they're not paying you monthly. They're going to send you the whole check up front, and you have to rate that money. So going back to what I was saying about having $1 million a year business, if you have a clean $1 million a year business where you're doing these 2 things right, the subscription and the professional services revenue, and you're not doing any funny business with those numbers, You can flip this business any day of the week for 5x to private equity. And the private equity firms are companies like Providence Strategic Growth, Level Equity, Wave Crest, Mainsail Partners. There's so many of these funds nowadays, right? They will buy that business any day of the week for $5 million, especially if you have some EBITDA. If you have $500,000 in EBITDA or something like that, they will pay you $5 million cold cash, get the deal done in 90 days or 60 days, and you're out. They'll buy the entire business. So that is like the first level you want to get to. You want to get to $1 million because it shows you have a real business. It shows you have repeatable things that you can keep selling and people want to keep buying, and you have some team around you, and it's a pretty decent business, right? And hell, if it's only you two and you're 50-50 partners, you walk away with $2.5 million. It's pretty good. You pay some tax on that, and it's pretty good, right? Now, this whole speech was about 8 figures, right? So let's get to the 8 figures now. So all right, how we got to 8 figures? So in year 4, the whole goal was to take this from 1.2 and to do a little bit more than double that up. So we got the business to 3.6 in revenue, and that was about $2.2 million in EBIT. And this is revenue, so 3.6. And we did that just by doing the same thing we kept doing, sending 5,000 emails a day, right, doing our demos. I think we hired 1 more AE, so that made a pretty big difference, right? Because we had another salesperson out there calling people, doing these demos, and growing the business, right? Also, what we did was we took our ASP up. ASP is average selling point, right? Average selling price, whatever you want to call it. Because remember, again, in year 1, our first customer was $5,000, right? In year 3, we started doing deals that were like $200,000, $250,000. So that's like big chunks of revenue that are growing the business very quickly, very, very, very quickly, right? Go ahead.
I have a question on that. So how did your product grow in that?
Yeah. So very, very great question. At the end of the day, the only thing we did was we just listened to the customer, right? Because when you're in these big accounts, right? I think by year 4 or so, we had probably Visa, we had FedEx, right? And if you just listen to your customer, they will guide you along the way. Because at the end of the day, there is no SaaS software that a big enterprise customer is just going to take off the shelf. I don't care if it's Workday, if it's ADP, if it's ServiceNow, any of these guys. It never works off the shelf. Because all of these companies are like mazes. They have insane requirements. They have insane processes. No software is just magically going to work for them, right? They're going to tell you, I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Debbie.
Oh, Debbie, that's right. They're going to tell you, hey, Debbie, I need this feature to work like this, or I need a new feature to do this, or hey, my boss just said we have this new policy and now this whole thing needs to work like this. If you say no to them, sooner or later they're just going to be like, all right, we're going to find someone who can listen to us, right? So the name of the game, at least in today's world, in SaaS, is listen to the customer and just build the things for the customer. Don't charge them. Don't charge them. Just build the stuff, right? Because at the end of the day, there's a high likelihood that the next customer that's going to come on is going to see that feature and they're going to be like, okay, no, this makes sense. This is why I should pay you not $50,000, I should pay you $100,000, right? So the way we went from 1.2 to 3.6 was, again, we raised our price point, right? Because we had so many more features in the platform, right? There's so many more things it could do. So now my salespeople, they felt more comfortable going to the market and saying, hey, this thing's going to be $250,000 a year. This is how much it's going to cost. And by the way, by year 4, we had 50 customers, right? So we could just roll off a slide and say, hey, here's all the logos that use it, right? Now, in year 4, we had to offer to sell the whole business for, I think it was about $24 million, right? We could have took that. We each would have walked away with $12 million or something like that, right? So that's about an 8x multiple on 3.6. You get to 3.6 a year, and you have a pretty good roadmap of more customers, and you have a pretty good pipeline. You can flip a business 7, 8x all day of the week, right? From again those same private equity funds, right? You're not going to get a strategic buyer. In my head, when I first started the business, I was thinking, it'd be great to sell this to Workday or something like that. It's such a cool outcome. The problem is to Workday, a $3 million a year business. It's why would they even spend time on that, right? It's not interesting to them. It's not going to move the needle in any way, right? You can really only do a big strategic exit if you're doing $20, $30, $40 million a year in revenue, right? That's when you can do those kind of things, right? But you can still flip a $3.6 million business for $24, $25 million, right? The private equity. But again, you have good growth, you have good GDR, you have good NDR. 3 metrics that matter. That's the only thing that matters. And we had good EBITDA, right? We were bootstrap, right? So we had a lot of EBITDA. Now here's the cool part though. So on that EBITDA, remember the escort model, flow through, right? So on that EBITDA, my business partner made $1.1 million for that year, and I made $1.1 million that year. So that was a good damn year, right? And then in year 5, we're in year 5 now, right? We took the business to the point to which we sold the business back in March. So by the time we were at March, we were at about $5.1 million in ARR. and we had about like 3.6 million of EBITDA. Oops. Right? And that's when we were like, all right, now the numbers like make a lot of sense, right? Now this is like real money. So as we went into year 5, on that $3.6 million of EBITDA, I made about like, we each made about like 1.7 million bucks that year. So if you add all this up, like how much money we made this year, year 3, year 4, year 5, me and my business partner had already personally cleared 3 million bucks each on the business. So the thing was a win, even if the thing, shut down the next day. Fuck it, we still made money. Like we still made good money and like, more money than I would have made doing anything else, right? But at $5.1 million in ARR, when you cross that like 5 million is like a core number. Because when you're talking to the PE funds, there's some PE funds that will buy your business below 5 million, right? But again, they might pay you 5x, 6x, 7x, right? 7x on a good day. Most of them will buy it for like 5x. But once you get to 5 million, that is like a magic number in this bootstrap game, where all of a sudden the next level of funds will come, right? Because when you're below 5 million, you're only going to get the funds that have raised like 100 million, 200 million bucks. So they can only make so many bets and they can only spend so much money. Once you cross $5 million, that's when you go into the bigger games like the Insight Partners, Summit Partners. These are much larger private equity funds. These are billion-dollar funds. So they can write much bigger checks and they play a bigger game. And once you hit that $5 million number, these folks will know like about your business, right? They'll just know it. They have their own ways of figuring out this information and they'll figure out how to find you, right? And at that point, that is where you can go to the market and say, hey, I want a 9, 10x multiple on the business. And that's what we did this year, right? Because again, we have good growth, we have good GDR, we have good NDR. The GDR and NDR, the only numbers you need to remember for those is keep it above 90%, right? I don't know the exact calculations in my head on how you calculate it. Just look it up though, like AI can do it for you. Because like basically you have to look at like all your revenue month over month and then it'll give you the 90, like whatever the percentile is, right? If you're below 90%, 5x max, that's the max multiple you ever sell a business. But if you have 90% plus on both GDR and NDR, you can sell that at a premium. Premium is like an 8x to 10x business, right? So once we got to year 5, like which we're in right now and early in March, we basically hired a banker, right? So you can hire bankers, right? A banker is someone who's going to look at your business and sell your business, right? They're going to create a book. They're going to create like a basically fucking PowerPoint deck. They're going to create a massive PowerPoint deck on your business and make the business look great, right? They can build all these charts and all this stuff. And what the banker does is they will go and send this out to all the big funds, right? The Summit Partners, the Insight Partners, all these massive guys, Kenneth Partners and all these guys, right? And then those guys will bid on the business, right? Now, always keep in mind, the banker will take a percent. You can negotiate this. Typically, they'll take like 3% or something like that, but you can negotiate it to 1.5, 2% if they think there's a high likelihood of you selling the business. So we hired a banker. He's a great guy out of Arizona. He took the business and he found us a deal at 50 million bucks, right? Sick ass deal. Now, we had 2 options. We could have sold the whole thing and just been done with it and walked away with 25 million each. We didn't want to do that though. The problem is because in life, it is very hard to do this again, right? The odds of you being able to repeat this thing is like damn near impossible, right? Because a lot of this is just like damn luck, right? Like it's just like timing and luck and being in the right place at the right time. So we were like, shit, we don't want to do that. So the deal we did was we said, hey, we'll sell off 20% of the business, right? So cut us a $10 million check. I'll walk away with 5. My business partner will walk away with 5. It's a little bit more than that. And when we will still control the board and we will still have 80% left of the business. Because in my eyes, if I was able to do in 5 years, take it to $5 million bucks, if I put another 5 years in, right? Shit, can I get it to $20 million in revenue, right? On a $20 million business doing $10 million a year, you can flip that for 12x, 13x. So all of a sudden, that's $250,000 that you're going to sell that thing for, right? And so then the check becomes like $100 million check. And again, you only have so much time left to play these games, right? These games take a lot out of you, and you're going to have family and like a bunch of other shit that you have to deal with. But for us, we were like, nah, we're still in the game, right? Like it's only been 5 years, right? We can easily put another 5 years in. And there's one really big reason why we wanted to put 5 years in, and this is important. So if you remember in year 1, I said we started the company as an S corp, right? As soon as we did that deal this year where we sold off 20%, we converted the company to a C corp, right? So in year 5, sold 20%, right? And then we converted to a C corp. The important thing about C corps is when you convert to a C corp, you can get what's called QSBS treatment. Anyone ever heard of that? QSBS? You heard of QSBS? Yeah. Stands for Qualified Small Business Stock. Again, it was part of one of these tax cuts back in the day. But what that means is that if you hold that business for 5 years, right? If you hold a QSBS entity, a QSBS C corp entity for 5 years, you will pay no capital gains on your next liquidity event, up to 10x of your basis, right? So when we did this deal, even though we got it to a $50 million valuation, when we did our kind of appraisal, you have to do an appraisal on the business with a third party, we told them, hey, put that appraisal at like 25 million bucks or because now, any number I sell the business to up to 250 million, on the next exit, I will pay no capital gains tax. That's insane, right? That's insane. Let's say we sell the business again at 100 million bucks and I own 40%, or walk away $40 million. If I had to pay capital gains on that, that's like 8 million bucks that you're just giving to the government. I don't know about y'all. I don't know where everyone leans, but I don't really care to give that much money to the government, right? Whether you're Democrat or Republican or whatever, right? Who wants to do that? That's stupid, right? So when we did this deal, we did something very smart, which was we converted it to a C Corp, right? And we started what's called our QSBS clock. And the clock is 5 years, right? Okay, so it's 5 years. So basically, we did this deal in call it April 1st, right? I have to hold the entity now until April 1st, 2030. Only up to that point. After, on April 2nd, I can sell the business and I pay no capital gains tax. That's insane, right? That's insane. The amount of money you would save on that is ridiculous, right? It's like generational wealth that you would just give to the government, right? You want to keep that. So that is why we did that, and that's why we did it in this year, right? So we just have this clock, and it's like, okay, let's put another 5 years in, right? And so now the good thing is like, hey, oh yeah, go ahead, man.
Oh, so there's a new phase-in with the big beautiful bell?
Yep.
Oh, you're gonna mention that? Okay.
So the thing is with the new tax cuts, right, it doesn't apply to us, right? It only applies if you do the QSBS now.
Yeah.
We did it before the tax cut, so we kind of got screwed on it because like the clock changes, I think. I think like there's like a 2-year cliff and a 3-year cliff or something like that.
3-year cliff.
Yeah.
It's up to 7.5.
Exactly. So unfortunately it doesn't apply to us, so I gotta sit in the thing for 5 years, but whatever, it's fine with me, right?
Okay.
Now, the other thing is like, remember, in year 5, we were doing about like $3.5 million of EBITDA, right? So in an S-Corp model, that money comes to you personally, right? Which is great, right? But we wanted to get out of that mode of being like, all right, let's just take this money personally. Because when you get a business that's giving you $1 million a year, it is very easy for you to be like, why keep growing this thing, right? I'm chilling, right? I can do whatever I want to do. I can pay all my bills and still chill. So we wanted, there was like a mental shift where it's like, hey, let's not take this money personally anymore. Let's take that $3.5 million and let's invest in the business. So now this year, now we're hiring the leaders. So now we're hiring like a CRO. The CRO we're about to hire is like a hitter. This guy took his last company from like $2 million in revenue to $50 million in revenue, right? Really, but these guys are expensive. They're not cheap. They're going to cost you a couple points of equity, $400 grand a year and stuff like that. Go ahead, man.
When you did your C Corp, did
Yep.
you do it as a Nevada entity or as
Nah,
a
the investors always force you to do it as Delaware still. I know like in the news, you see a lot of these companies being like, we're going to move to Nevada. That shift is still going.
Because I
But-
saw like Sequoia was recommending
Yeah.
his portfolio to go there as well.
Yeah, so there is a handful of funds that are shifting to Nevada, which is good. It's good for all of us here, right? There's going to be more revenue that comes into the states. But the private equity firm we worked with was New York, right? So maybe like the West Coast funds, they're probably more apt to do in like Nevada because the courts are closer. There's like physically closer if you have to go to court to do things, right? But if you're dealing with like New York or Boston funds, most of these guys are out of New York and Boston. They still have like alignment to Delaware and whatnot. And that's mostly because they use East Coast lawyers, right? So like they use these firms like Goodwin and stuff like that. Cooley on the West Coast, they're probably cool with it being in Nevada. But yeah, they forced us to do it in Delaware. We wanted to do it in Nevada. Nevada's actually pretty good from a court perspective, but they told us to do it in Delaware.
The Nevada courts are untested too, so that's
Yeah.
another thing.
Yeah, exactly. So like there's so much like provenance and stuff like that with Delaware. Like there's just so much like precedence for different court cases, so they still force you to do it in Delaware. Yeah, but now essentially what the game is now is like, all right, we have 5 years, right? We have 5 years and we have $3.5 million of EBITDA. So that's cash that doesn't come to me anymore that we have to pay corporate tax on now because we're a C Corp, right? That's the difference. So now we have to spend that money. So it's like, hey, how can we spend that money in the most advantageous way where we can go from $5 million a year to $15 to $20 million a year in the next 5 years, right? And then we just sell the whole thing again, and hopefully, we can exit the whole thing at a couple $100 million, right? If we do that, I'll make $75 million or so. My business partner makes $75 million. The investors will make some money, right? Our employees now that we are a C Corp, we can hand out shares, right? So my whole goal now is like, hey, every employee that's rode with me, all these these 19-year-olds that joined me in year 2 and year 3, let's make them all millionaires, right? And let's make them all very, very wealthy in this whole game, right? That's how you can do that. Now, looking at all this, the reason why I tell people, hey, don't go do the VC route, is if you go do the VC route, you might be in year 5 with like 10% in revenue. I'll give you a true anecdote story. One of my buddies, he started a company, I think it was called Reflective or something like that, right? He got this thing up to $15, $20 million in revenue, right? At one point, he was going home telling his wife, like, hey, we're worth 100 million, 150 million on paper, right? It's all paper money. And then the problem is he didn't get to keep those metrics going. He didn't keep that growth, he didn't keep that GDR, he didn't keep that NDR, and he didn't control his company because the VC companies took majority of the cap table, right? So they controlled the board. He had a board seat, but he didn't control the board, right? So at the end of the day, they sold that company for 1x revenue. They got to walk away with 0, right? Because the investor's like, hey, we got other shit to do, right? We want to move our money around, we want to take a loss on this. The investors, they're like financial geniuses, right? They know what they're doing. And now think about that. That guy spent 10 years, built a great $15, $20 million a year business, and had to sell that and literally walk away with nothing, right? Because also when you're doing these deals, do people here know how like preferred equity works, like participating preferred and stuff like that? Basically, just in short, right? Let's say you, what's your name? Jessica. Let's say you have a business, right? And you value that business at $10 million, right? And you have an investor that comes and says, hey, I'm going to invest $1 million in you, right? That's fine. They can give you the $1 million, but there's going to be a lot of clauses on that $1 million. They're going to say, hey, I want to have downside protection, meaning if you ever sell that business less than 10 million, you have to give their 1 million back. It's not like you can sell a business for 5 million and you just give them 10%. No, you're giving them the whole million. And if they have preference on that, they might say, hey, I want to participate in this whole thing up to a 3x return. So you have to sell that thing for above 30 million. Otherwise, you have to give them their 1 million back plus whatever equity they have. There's a lot of these games that all these guys are way smarter than you that are going to put into these contracts, right? And if you're not very clear in the negotiation, you're going to get jacked on the whole thing. You're going to get screwed, right? So that's what happened to a lot of buddies that I know who, spent 10 years, spent 10 years on something. You should be able to walk away with something, right? Now again, a lot of the people who are playing the VC game, you're trying to play like a massive game, right? You're trying to get to $1 billion unicorn level status, right? That's not hard. I mean, that's not easy to do, right? That is like damn near impossible. This game is like a lot more methodical, right? You get to get chips off the table a lot earlier on, right? You could, even in this year, like in year 2, where we each took home, a couple $100 grand. It's like shit. We still took home a couple $100 grand, right? In distributions, it was tax efficient as well. So we still had like something to show for it at the end of the day. My business partner, he had kids, man. He had a wife. I had a wife, right? I can't just be sitting here making no money. I don't got a trust fund or anything like that, right? So this model right here is something I'm pretty passionate about because I think like it allows you to get chips off the table, right? You don't just want to play these games for paper money, right? That's like you can't do anything with paper money. You can't get a loan on paper money. You can't do anything with paper money, right? It might feel good, right? You might get a card or a certificate or something like that, but it's all bullshit, right? Unless that money is in your bank account and you pay taxes on it, I don't know. To me, it's not really money, right? So this model right here, get the chips off the table. You control the company, right? We still control our whole board, right? So we control the board. 3-person board, me and my co-founder control. Anything we want to do, we can do it, right? We want to cut a dividend, we can cut a dividend, right? Anything we want to do, we can do that, right? And we have destiny. We have control over our destiny, meaning there's no limit on sale. Our investors can't say, hey, you can only sell this at a certain value. I can sell the whole thing tomorrow if I want, right? Just be out of the thing if I want to, right? So bootstrapping it gives you control, gives you chips off the table, and look, you're not going to get a massive exit. I don't think I'll ever be sitting here with like $1 billion exit or anything like that. That's the numbers, the math just doesn't work, and the timelines just don't work. But you can still have a great exit, right? You can still go and make 10, 20 million bucks by only putting a few years into the business, right? All right. So my apologies for being late, everyone. I know I kind of held you all for 30 minutes more. Hopefully that was like helpful. I kind of have to see that out. Hopefully that was like. Any questions I can answer for anyone?
Did in year 5, did PE ask you to revest?
So PE didn't come in until year 5.
Yeah, no, but did they ask you when you converted to a sequel? Did they ask you to start a vesting clock for you and your co-founder?
Nah, we owned all of our equity up front. Now we did carve out an option pool. We carved out a few % on the option pool. And so like when we're making these next hires, CRO, CTO, and things like that, let's say I give my CRO 2%, right? That 2% isn't given up front. You never want to give the equity up front, never. If 2 things with equity, 1 year cliff, meaning if they bounce within 1 year, they get nothing, right? They get 0, and then invest that over 4 years. So if you give someone 2%, they get 0.5% a year, right? And you have to earn that year over year, right? So with any new hire that's coming in that's tapping into the option pool, they got invested, but now we have all of our equity up front.
And then actually a follow-up question is, not follow-up, different question, is it sounds like you built this through COVID. As you were growing this, did you experience like not churn necessarily with customers, but churn if you're selling per seat, like you probably.
Yeah, we did like fixed price contracts, man.
Wow.
Yeah, the problem with per seat is for one, it makes your accounting a nightmare, right? Because you have to keep auditing the licenses and and then like the other problem with selling per seat is like, is these customers like they divest and they buy things all the time, right? So like one customer like McKesson, they can say, hey, we're selling off a business unit. Okay, we just shed it off $10,000 jobs, right? Like we don't need 10,000 licenses, so all of a sudden your numbers go down, right? So the one smart decision we did up front was we just told all of our customers like, hey, you can buy this price per seat thing, and you can do that. But we would recommend, let's do a fixed price contract. Tell us what works for you, tell us what works for us, lock it in, right? And the thing is they're gonna wanna lock that in for 3-4 years. So that's another thing that helped our metrics out was we had like these multi-year contracts. So we have contracts that are like 10 years long, right? Because we just tell the customer, hey, just lock it in. We won't raise the price, right? It's a T-Mobile model. Like T-Mobile hasn't raised prices in years, right? So people love that. They're like, all right, cool, just keep the price the same. But yeah, the problem with like consumption models and like price per user models is you are super dependent on like what that company's gonna do. And these companies are like massive cities and towns, right? Like, FedEx, 500,000 people, that's like a pretty big town, right? Towns change, like things change, they sell things, they buy things, they reorder, these companies just change every day, right? Because they're such a maze and they're so massive that I never liked the price per seat model, right? Because like you're just at the mercy of like one divestiture or like, hey, we're just selling the whole business, right? Like, we had a customer Activision. Activision got bought by Microsoft. Once Microsoft bought it, they were like, we don't need y'all anymore. Trim everything Activision was doing. You're gonna do what we're doing now, right? So it's like, you kind of have to be like careful with these things and whatnot, right? The other thing I will say, keep in mind, is concentration of customers, right? So you can have like a $5 million a year business, right? But if 4 million of that revenue is made up by 2 customers, you will not get a 10x multiple, right? Because that business is that much more risky, right? Because the buyer is going to say, hey, wait, if something happens to these 2 customers, like these 2 customers get acquired, they sell off a part of their business, things change, markets, tariffs fuck up their business, they might just cancel that contract with you and there goes your business, right? So that's the other thing, is you want to be very diligent about like how you're pricing these deals and making sure that you have like good cohorts of customers. There shouldn't be the rule of thumb is there shouldn't be any one customer that represents more than 25% of your revenue, right? So if you have a $5 million a year business, you should not have any customer that's over $1 million. And it's kind of hard to do, right? Like right now, like we have one of our customers like, hey, let's do like a $2-3 million a year deal with you. Money's money, right? Like you don't want to say no to money, but it's like, that's going to mess up our metrics, so it's going to mess up the bigger money, right? Like the larger outlook of the money, right? So, these are all things like you have to kind of be aware of, right? When you're in year 1, a lot of these things don't really matter, but if you, like my goal here is like, just have like a North Star and be like, hey, this is how I want my business to look 5 years from now, right? I want X million dollars in revenue. I want these cohorts of buckets of customers paying us X amount. And if you follow that North Star, then you'll end up in a position where you have good growth, you have good GDR, you have good NDR. And then again, you won't even have to make the calls to private equity. They'll call you. These guys will call you. They'll email you every single day. That's their business, right? Their business is deploying capital. They've raised a bunch of money from pension funds and firefighters funds and teachers retirement funds. They have all this capital, right? They need, like their business, they need to deploy that capital, right? They need to buy pieces of your business or buy your whole business outright. So they're there. Like the capital is sitting there. It will always be there. People hate on private equity. I used to hate on private equity because like they are kind of evil people, right? But they serve a very valuable service in this world where it's giving people like you all, founders, liquidity. Because other than that, what are your options for liquidity? Going public, you know how hard it is to go public? You know how much of a massive undertaking that is to go public to get liquidity? That's hard as shit, right? Selling it to a strategic acquirer, very hard. The strategic acquirers, they're not just every day thinking about your little business, right? They got massive other things they're doing. So they're not just there buying businesses. You might read about it, doesn't happen every day. So private equity, even though in my personal view, I think they're very evil people, they do serve a very valuable service to the world where giving young founders and new founders and things like that a pathway to liquidity. At the end of the day, no one here is starting a nonprofit, right? Right? Your only goal in this thing, at the end of the day, just keep in mind, your only goal is to make money, right? You can do all this virtuous stuff and say, I want to make the world better and all these various things, right? But at the end of the day, you're not starting a nonprofit. If that's what you want to do, start a nonprofit, right? It's way easier. Go raise a bunch of money, pay yourself a good salary, enjoy life. You're starting a for-profit company, right? At the end of the day, you're doing this for liquidity. Let's just be honest, right? Everyone's doing this for liquidity. So you can better your life, you can better your kid's life, you can better your family's life and stuff like that. So private equity is there, right? They raise these funds every year. They have to deploy the capital, right? They're actively looking for businesses that have good growth, good revenue, right? More than $1 million of revenue. They're there. And the thing is, we did this deal, like when we sold 20%, we closed it in 3 weeks. From the point where we signed an LOI. And if you want, I can spend 5 minutes to just tell you how that process works. Do y'all want to know like how that process works? Like how to actually sell it? Okay.
Absolutely.
So once we found a good buyer that gave us that we had good discussion with, because there's some chemistry, right? You gotta meet in person, you gotta do all this shit, drink and whatnot. I don't even like drinking, right? But like, fuck, you gotta drink. You gotta go out and just get tossed with these guys. Once you find a good buyer that you like, that you're engaged with, they will submit an LOI. That LOI will say, hey, here is what we value the business at, and here is how much we want to buy, and here is how much we're gonna pay, right? Now, don't always get consumed by like how much they're gonna pay, because they can do funny shit with that pay too. They can say, hey, we'll pay you $10 million, Jessica, But 5 million of that is going to be in cash, and 5 million of that is going to be on a note at 8%, and we'll pay that note at some next liquidity event down the road for some other purpose, right? So they might not even give you the 5 million. The only headline you want to know in there is like how much are you paying me and how much is in cash at point of signing. Because they can also say things like, hey, we'll pay you 10 million, 5 million today, 5 million when you hit this revenue number called an earn out, right? So they'll make you earn it out, right? They do this a lot. The only thing that matters is how much cash they're paying you on day of closing. So that's the LOI. There's also going to be board provisions in the LOI saying, hey, if we invest in your business, especially if they're only buying a minority stake, because if they buy a majority stake, if they buy 51%, the business is theirs, right? Like, you don't own the business anymore, right? The business is theirs. They might give you a board seat, but they're going to control the board and they're going to do everything they want to do. So there's going to be board provisions on the LOI that say, hey, this is what you can, this is what you can't do, this is what we can do, all these various things, right? At that point is when you hire the big lawyers. You can't just use a lawyer off of Upwork or like your friend who's a lawyer to do these things, right? These closing agreements, like closing binders, like 500 pages, right? So you need to hire a good firm. We use a firm called FPT. See, a lot of people are going to say, oh, I need to use Cooley, I need to use Goodwin. These guys are going to charge you $2,000 an hour, right? They're going to run up the bill. Every single little phone call they make, they're going to charge you for that. Use a Midwest lawyer. FPT, Frost Brown Todd. There's a bunch of these Midwest lawyers that are just like much more ethical. They'll charge you, a few $100 an hour. It's much more cost effective because the overall deal is going to cost you about like 200 grand to do, right? So after you sign the LOI, that LOI is going to have an exclusivity period, right? Typically, it's going to be 30 to 45 days where you can't talk to any other buyers. You can't shop the deal around, right? You are in exclusivity, and buyers take that stuff very, very, very seriously, right? Once you're in exclusivity, you're going to go into diligence, right? The buying entity is going to bring in their vendors. So they're going to bring in companies like PwC or Ernst & Young or Code & Co. These are all these companies because there's three main things they're going to vet your business on. They're going to do a financial review, a financial audit. So they're going to bring in like PwC. I forgot the company they use for us, but they use some CPG or something like that. Basically, they're going to bring in these like CPA guys. You have to give them access to your billing system, QuickBooks or something like that, and they're going to go through every single line item on your finances and make sure that you're not doing any of this BS over here, like messing up your numbers and whatnot, making sure your taxes are paid, and all these kind of things. And if they find one thing in there that's like out of whack, they'll shut the deal down. They'll be like, yeah, we're out, right? So that's why, going back to what I said, make sure you're running a clean business, right? Don't try to do funny things with numbers. It's gonna lead up to something at the end of the day, right, that you don't want to be a part of. So that's number one. They're going to do a deep financial review, both on your finances, make sure you're recognizing revenue correctly, make sure you're paying your taxes and stuff like that. Taxes are really important too, like state sales taxes and income taxes and all that, because even if like when they start doing those, when they start doing that financial diligence, they might say, hey, you have a $100,000 tax liability to some random state, right? And what they're going to do is they're going to make you warrant that on a multiple, right? So they're going to say, hey, if we found this tax liability, there could be more. So even though we're going to pay you $10 million, you need to warrant us $1 million for 2 years in case anything else comes up. Meaning they're going to give you that $10 million, but you can't even spend $1 million of that because you might have to pay it back, right? So they're going to bring in these firms to do a deep financial audit on your business. And you better make sure like everything's clean and everything's taken care of. So that's why like having good hygiene from year one, having good bookkeeping, having good record keeping of taxes, extremely important. Because if you fuck that up in the early years, it is so hard to recover that. It is massively hard when you're doing invoices all the time and whatnot. So that's number one. Number two, if you're doing a tech company, I would assume it's logical here doing tech companies, like entrepreneurs and stuff like that, tech. Yeah, so they're going to do a code review, right? So they're going to bring in, I don't know, for a bigger deal, they'll bring in like Deloitte or something like that, or they're smaller folks like Code & Co. and these other companies that are going to open up your entire platform. You're going to have to give them your repositories. They're going to look at every line of code. And the core thing there is IP, right? Because nowadays everyone's using open source libraries, right? But you have to make sure you have the MIT licenses for these libraries. You can't just be pulling these for free, right? Because they're going to look at that and they're going to say, gosh, shit, you use these libraries and you don't have licenses for these. So like this product isn't what we thought it was. It's not as like intuitive and novel as we thought it was because you're not paying for these licenses, right? So when you're building these softwares, if you are using open source code, everything from a simple text editor, right, to like image capture or anything like that in your software, make sure you have the MIT licenses or whatever the license model is. Make sure you have the license model and keep an inventory of that stuff. So you can say, hey, here's all of our open source code, and here's how it's licensed, and here's the inventory of all that, right? Because they're going to look for everything, right? And then they're also going to do like pen tests. They're also going to do like security tests to make sure there's no overall vulnerabilities. So that's number two. Number three is they're going to do a legal review, right? So they're going to look at like all these structures, your S corp, all these various things. Because when you're doing these businesses, there's all this bullshit you have to do, like this state compliance stuff, and pay this and pay that. There's all these like random things you have to do. And they're going to make sure that from a legal perspective, everything is right. Your operating agreement, your articles of organization, right? Your cap table, all these various things. They're going to make sure all this stuff is buttoned up. And if it's not, either the deal could still happen, but they're gonna make you warrant it, or they're just gonna pull out, right? And then number 4 is typically, like with a business like us, is they're gonna do customer calls, right? And when they do customer calls, this is probably the most important part, is they're going to wanna call 75% of your revenue, right? So if you're doing $1 million a year, they're gonna wanna speak to at least $750,000 of revenue, right? And if you're not gonna be on the call with that, they're gonna be like, hey, just broker us the introduction and we will do this call ourselves. And they are gonna ask that customer everything. Do these guys pick up the phone when it comes to customer support? Do you like this product? Will you renew this product, right? Do you wanna buy more of this product, right? These kind of things. They're gonna do that. Like we did probably 50 customer calls when we did this deal, right? And you better make sure you have great relationships with your customers, right? Because otherwise, if your customers don't like you, they're gonna tell these guys, they're gonna be like, no, what, we're gonna cancel this contract at the end of the year, right? And then the deal will not go through, right? So you have to have a great relationship with your customers, and you want to make sure your customers are speaking well on your behalf. Once you get through all that, we did it in about 2 weeks, right? Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. At the end of the day, at that point is when you're going to get to what's called the closing binder, meaning all of the legal articles, right? Because there's a purchase agreement, there's all this transfer agreement, there's all these things. They're going to put this in a closing binder, right? And at that point, they're going to do what's called holding the signatures in escrow, meaning me and my co-founder, we sign these documents, right? We sign a set of documents. There's a carbon copy of those documents that the buying company signs, but there's not any document that has both signatures on it, right? The legal teams, like their legal team, they hold their signatures. Our legal team, they hold our signatures, right? And those do not get combined until they wire you that money, right? Now, the tough thing about wiring you the money is these funds don't necessarily have the money. This is the crazy thing, right? Because it's a concept called committed capital. They have to call the capital. Meaning, if you're selling your business to a fund that is a $100 million fund, they don't just have $100 million, right? They have a bunch of people that have signed up and said, yeah, we'll fund this, right? But they are only funding it at the deal level, right? So when there's a deal to be done, they will call the capital and they will send the capital. So like when our deal was getting done, we signed everything on a Friday. They didn't have to wire the money until a Monday. Typically, that's how it works. The people are going to say, hey, sign up all the signatures on Friday, hold it in escrow. So we have 48 hours to go call our investors and say, hey, we're doing this deal with $10 million. I need you to wire me this money now, right? It's a very crazy thing, right? It's absolutely insane. And so you better hope these guys actually have this money, because there's a lot of people out there that have committed capital but can't call the capital. Because it could be something silly like, hey, this investor's mom died or something like that. He's not picking up the phone. What do you want me to do, right? So you have to verify funds. So a part of your diligence on the fund is verifying funds and making sure that they don't just have John Doe, grandparent, that's their investor. You want to make sure that they have investors that are like institutional investors, like CalPERS. CalPERS is the big California retirement fund thing, right? Pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, right? They have Saudi money and stuff like that. Those guys will always send the money, right? Because they sign committed capital agreements. But don't ever do a deal with a fund where there's these funds out there that are called like search funds, right? Meaning they don't have any committed capital until they find a business, and then they have to go figure it out last minute. Don't do that. That's not going to lead to anything good. So anyway, over the weekend, you're sitting there in massive anticipation because you're like, shit, I really hope this dude can find this money right now and make sure they call this capital. Most of the time they won't, right? And then on Monday, they'll give you a call and they'll say, all right, what is your account number? That's like the special limit, right? You give them your account number and you give them your routing number, right? You better make sure those numbers are right too, because it's really hard to track back that much money. And then boom, the money hits. It's in a pending stage for a couple days, right? You can't really touch it. The banks are going to hold it. It's a massive amount of money. And then after a couple days, it's released, and then I don't know, you gotta take vacation or something like that. That's pretty much how it works. 30 days, right? 30 days, and you can do that. 5 years of kind of grind. But if you do it in this model, it's not that bad because you're taking ships across the way, right? You're taking a few $100 grand here, a few $100 grand here, so you always have something to show for it, right? Cool. All right. I think I went for kind of over a lot of time. Good.
What was the insurance company that you recommended for
Yeah.
your deals that you're using?
For insurance? Yeah, that's a great question, dude, because when you're doing SaaS deals, right, there's a big part of that that's called tech E&O, which essentially is cybersecurity liability, right? So if you fuck something up, you need to have coverage for restoring data and stuff like that. So we use the Hartford. And the reason why we use the Hartford is because at the end of the day, when you're doing deals with Capital One and Wells Fargo and all that, they're going to require you to have some pretty insane limits, right? $10 million E&O, $10 million workers' comp and all that stuff. And there's not just a lot of companies out there that are going to write those policies, especially for a small business, right? So like Geico is not going to write that policy, right? You have to go to folks like Chubb, Hartford, Hiscox. Those are the only three that I know that will write those policies. And those policies aren't cheap, right? They're a couple grand a month, $2,000 to $3,000 a month to have those policies. I think now our insurance bill is $10 grand a month, right? right? Because we have all this like cyber crime and fidelity insurance and bonded policies and all that stuff. But I would say like Hartford is really easy to work with. And with Hartford, I remember like in year 2 when we had to go and actually get the insurance, we had probably like $1 million in workers' comp, $1 million in commercial liability, and we had $5 million in tech E&O. That's a big one, tech E&O. It stands for errors and omissions, tech errors and omissions. So if you make an error in your technology, you have coverage for that. We had $5 million. And I think at that point, the policy cost us maybe $12 grand a year, $1,000 a month.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is you talked about the only 3 things you looked in contracts. The other one I was surprised not to hear you say is like maybe like a fixed contract increase.
Ah, yeah.
Companies
So,
will say, hey, you can only do like a 3% increase
Yeah.
per year. How did you handle that from a vendor
Yeah.
perspective?
yeah, typically like when you're negotiating with these companies. So, what was your name again?
Joe.
Joe. So as I mentioned with Joe, we did these fixed price contracts, right? Where we'd say, hey, instead of doing this price per user per year and only getting 1-year contract, here's a fixed deal, right? Where you pay us $100 grand a year, we will not raise the price for 3 years, right? And it's a 3-year contract, right? Now at the end of that 3 years, we did have a renewal clause, right? And typically what we always followed was 3% or whatever CPI is. The CPI is really important because inflation's crazy now, right? Inflation might be plus 8%, right? So you got the CPI clause in there, which every company will allow you to do. Then at that point, depending on where we're at in the year and like what's going on in the economy, you can say, hey, CPI is 6%, right? We need to raise this at 6%. That's important, yeah. But that, I would say, like, especially when you're in year 1 or year 2, that's not what you want to worry about. You don't really care to have this like price escalator in there, right? You just want to get the damn contract, right? Because something as simple as like saying, hey, we're going to increase prices 6% per year, that these buying companies, like the companies you're selling to, the customers, they'll spend 4 weeks negotiating that with you, right? Because they don't want their prices to go up, right? So I would say, to me, that's not that important, right? I don't really care about the price escalators. I care about like getting that deal done, getting it signed, and getting that customer on my platform, right? I could care less about what the renewal terms are, right? Just keep paying me whatever I told you to pay me, and we're good, right? But I will say, private equity firms really like that renewal stuff. They have what's called a rule of 8, right? So if you do a 1-year deal, you need to have an 8% price escalator. If you do a 2-year deal, you need to have 6% price escalator, right? 3-year deal, 5% escalator, right? Because it's that. What I would say though is that like, as a small company, you don't want to do that. You want to make like really good friends with these customers, and you just want to be like, hey, I'm going to make your life easy. This amount of money you're paying me per year works for me, it works for my business. How many years do you want to lock that in for? Well, fuck it, I'll lock it in for 10 years, right? The companies will love that, right? Because they do all this forecasting too. The other thing you want to keep in mind is when you're doing those price escalators, see all these big companies, they do what's called, what is it called? It's called spend cubes, right? Pretty much every year their procurement team goes and looks at all the spend the company does, right? And all the contracts, right? Because all these companies are trying to lower their costs. Everyone's trying to lower their costs every year, right? So these companies are going to do this like, it's called application rationalization, right? Meaning, hey, rationalize the spend we're spending on all this fucking software that we buy every year, right? Because these companies just buy all this software, who knows if they even use it or not, right? So every year the procurement teams do this, right? And what you don't want to do is you don't want to be the vendor on that AppRat study that says, hey, here's just one vendor that has like this 10% increase. So we're paying them 100 grand this year, we're going to pay them 110 grand next year if we renew. That's going to flag, that's going to raise a flag, right? Meaning their procurement team is going to contact you. What's your name again? Ross. They're going to contact you and say, hey, Ross, tell me about your software. Why do you deserve a 10% increase a year? You don't want to have those conversations, right? Those conversations suck. They're going to figure out a way to either get you out of the company or reduce your spend drastically. You want to be the guy that's like, use the software, right? It's the same price every single year. I'm not raising your prices, right? It's a T-Mobile strategy, right? It's the Costco hot dog strategy, right? They never raise the prices of the damn hot dog, right? And people love it, right?
So then when you are doing these bake-offs, like how are you kind of standing out and winning against competitors?
Are you talking about when I'm trying to do the deal,
Yeah.
or when I'm going through like a renewal or something?
No, doing the deal.
Yeah, there's a couple different things, man, that we do that helps us stand out. One is I give them access to the software before they even sign a contract, right? 2, I tell them we will work with you fees at risk. I still do that till today, right? What that means is, let's say I'm in an engagement with a customer, we're doing demos, and they're like, hey, we want to buy this thing. It's going to take them 3 months to go through the procurement process to get all the contracts signed and all that stuff. I always end every call and I'll say, hey, I want to work with you, I want to partner with you, and to show you I'm a good partner, I will start working with you fees at risk. Don't pay me anything, you don't have to sign anything. We will set everything up for you. Obviously, we can't touch like your HR data, we can't touch your integrations. Anything we can do outside of that, we will start working with you today. Fees at risk. If you don't want to sign a contract, cool. You don't want to send money, we'll part ways as friends, right? But we will start working with you today if you want, right? And starting to build this thing out and build out your vision and help you get this program up and running. So that way, when we sign the contract, we're already 20-30% way done of implementation, and we're going to save you time. That little kicker right there will beat out any competitor. That's because a lot of your competitors are going to be VC-backed companies, they're going to be private equity-backed companies, right? That have clauses in there that are like, hey, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, right? When you're bootstrapping and you control the whole company, you can do whatever the fuck you want, right? And so you just tell this company like, hey, like, you know, we're about to close a massive deal right now with GM, right? We've been working with them for 6 months. They haven't paid us a penny, right? Because we just said, hey, we know this shit's gonna take a while. We know how long this procurement stuff takes, right? Let's start working now. And once you start working now, then they're not even gonna talk to any other vendors, right? They're gonna be like, hey, I'm meeting with this guy once a week, right? Like we have a project team and we assign resources. We're saying, hey, here's your project manager, here's your trainer, here's your integration specialist, right? And so then all of a sudden you're pretty much in there, right? And then you do a couple visits. We'll say, hey, where are you at? You're in Michigan. I'll come and visit you. Let's do a nice dinner, right? You take them out. By that point, they're not even gonna talk to any other vendor. They're gonna be like, hey, we're building on this, and I'm just waiting for my contract to get signed, and that's it, so I can pay these guys. So you give them that little leeway, especially as a small company, it'll work. Those two little tricks. Work and use that term, fees at risk, because that's like a known term that a lot of these companies know about, right? Where you just say, hey, I will work with you fees at risk, because that's showing that you have skin in the game. Right? You're saying, hey, I'm going to put up my own fucking money and work with you, right? I'm going to deploy my resources, and I'm going to take over this cost. And you know, if you sign a contract, great. If you don't, cool. Let's part ways as friends, and maybe we can work together in like a year or two or something like that. So that, right? That's like a fucking game changer, dude. And then also just like just being honest, right? Like you know, a lot of these companies, like sometimes you might have to feel like, oh, I need my company to look bigger, or I need to like make it seem like a bigger company to work with these big companies, right? But to be honest with you, a lot of these big companies, they kind of just want to like, they want a flexible vendor, so they're actually like more open to working with like the two-person company that has like full control and is like, you know, going to go through it. The one thing I will say though, which is really important, especially if we're trying to do what we did, like Fortune 500 sales, is those customers will audit your finances. Once again, very important to have good finances, right? Because they don't want to work with a company that's burning $5 million a year and that might go out of business next year, right?
Which is what I was going to follow up with, which is like, you know, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, which is like, why would they go with a Workday or somebody else, you know?
Yeah. Why? That's a great question, right? I mean, that's like the saying. It's like we used to say in consulting, no one gets fired for hiring McKinsey or whatever these funny bullshit terms are. At the end of the day, like, I think that applies to like CHRO level, CEO level, CFO level. So if you have a product where you can sell at that level, you don't have any of these problems here, right? But to sell at that level, to go get time with like the CHRO, JP Morgan Chase, like that would be my like creme de la creme customer. Like if I can get time with the CHRO, that's like crazy, right? But I'm not hitting the radar. Like the spend isn't there, right? Maybe the Workday guys, if you're paying Workday $10 million a year, maybe they're having conversations with the CHRO. I'm having conversations with like senior directors, managers, right? Senior managers, kind of that level, mid-level, right? So those people, they know how bad it is working with Workday. Like working with these big companies sucks, right? Like they're like so rigid. They're gonna charge you for every fucking thing. They're gonna every hour that you spend with them, you're gonna get another bill. And so the senior managers bear most of that grunt work, right? So they kind of know like, oh no, I'm not trying to deal with this fucking Oracle guy. This guy's gonna like nickel and dime me over here, right? I'd rather work with this guy that's saying, hey, I'll work with you for free, right? Like let's just start working now, right? Let's just start doing this. But again, going back to what I said is like when you do, especially when you're working with banks, they're gonna make you submit shit. Let's see, look at my phone real quick. Sorry, my wife is texting me. My wife is pregnant. My bad. I actually have to go to an OB-GYN appointment. This has been a crazy day. My bad. My sincere apologies. Cool. Any other questions before I roll? All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right. Cool.
Well, we hope you guys had a good time. Emergency, of course, OBGYN, that's like a must. Well, today was a different LinkUp session, but I hope you guys all enjoyed it. I think you guys actually did learn a lot from his 5 years. This is probably one of the most detailed of timeline that I've ever seen a founder actually give out, which is really, really nice and appreciated. So hopefully you guys learned something. Maneet's, all of his stuff is linked in our LinkedIn, our Instagram. There's going to be a recap video. This is all live streamed, so feel free to check out our YouTube. But yeah, the day is your guys'. You guys can feel free to roam around or chat around. But thank you guys so much for hanging on with us. We'll have We'll have LinkUp next month, again at the last Wednesday of every single month. And then a Rise Up that is to be coming as well. And that one's going to be at a different location than a WeWork. More details to be coming out sooner. But just keep an eye out on Slack and everything. But thank you guys so much. I hope you guys enjoyed. Oh, and then if you guys haven't signed in, please, please, please. Otherwise, Amara at the front is going to yell at me.